is great to be here with everyone and part of the conversation, particularly around the constantly changing talent landscape and how we all must be constantly pivoting to kind of help our organizations prepare for really what's around the corner when it comes to talent. And as we teed up this session, if 2022 really was the year of the Great Resignation, then 2023 is going to be the year of stability and trust as both employers and employees consider a broader mix of employment options and how to manage it. So as mentioned, I'm Steve Knox. I'm currently the VP of Global Talent Acquisition here at Ceridian. We're a global human capital management software company, and we really help companies kind of manage their entire employee life cycle with our cloud platform. I lead a team of 60 professionals globally across our organization. We do roughly 2,500 hires a year. And as mentioned, I've been in the talent space for over 25 years now. In a past life, I was actually the head of talent acquisition for General Electric and had a huge team of 500 people hiring in over 140 countries. So have really seen it all when it comes to kind of talent acquisition, and happy to kind of impart my knowledge about what's happening in this market space. So let's set the tone. So, who would have imagined we'd find ourselves in the world that we're in right now? We are emerging from this pandemic. Many of you have figured out how to kind of formalize your approach to the way of working in this forever changed world with the circumstances that we're dealing with. Office spaces have now been reconfigured. We're grappling with a hybrid or virtual way of working. And in some cases, companies are now actually bringing people back into the office on a more permanent basis. And as an HR function, we're really rethinking what work needs to be done, how we do that work, and particularly in a virtual approach. But most importantly, the relationship between employer and employee has dramatically changed in a very fundamental way. Reverberations of this period of collective strain, notably the impact on everyone's mental health and general wellness as a result of the pandemic, have left a lot of workers questioning whether the traditional ways of working are still going to work for everyone. And employers are feeling this in the form of attrition and greater challenges in terms of enticing and hiring and retaining their talent like never before. So this war for talent we've been talking about for the past 20 years is not over. It's just the rules have now changed, and we're all learning that we must pivot much more quickly at a greater speed of change than we've never seen. So where we find ourselves is in this world of chaos, confusion, and constant change. And if we look at kind of the recent situation, on one hand, there have been a slew of tech companies that have been laying off employees. And in fact, we've seen close to 140,000 layoffs in the tech space globally. And that was actually before, the recent announcements from Meta and Salesforce around their second round of cuts. And then on the other hand, we have all this economic data across Canada and the US that shows a hot, resilient labor market with more open vacancies than have ever been posted. We've also gone from a situation where companies were scrambling to find enough workers to fill their needs during the pandemic, to again, some companies kind of, laying off that same talent. Having said that, there are still those skill sets that are very much in demand. And what comes to mind are like cybersecurity professionals, where everyone is clamoring for that type of talent. Beyond the disparate hiring numbers, the experience gets even more interesting when we look at what's happening from a total rewards and compensation perspective. So we've gone from a scenario 6 months ago where folks like software engineers were demanding outrageous compensation demands beyond standard salary ranges, but that's now equalized and they're back to more normalized and historical norms in terms of comp expectations. When I look at my own area and talent acquisition, again, it was only 6 months ago that recruiters were the hottest in demand need that a lot of companies had, and they were being highly compensated. Now, we look at today's situation and recruiters are probably the first victims of layoffs happening across the tech space. So you really see how the pendulum shifts really quickly. And all this indicates that what we all need to do is come up with a very agile approach to our kind of talent strategies moving forward. Then we layer on kind of the socioeconomic circumstances as well. So we're again grappling with this unclear economic picture that we're struggling with, rising interest rates across a number of countries, And again, employees who are really grappling and struggling with their own mental health issues after the pandemic. So we've gone from remote is the new normal to many companies, again, starting to force employees back into the office and really grappling with that. And now layer on, the most recent change to kind of hit the talent space, which is ChatGPT. And we're all kind of trying to figure out and determine what impact that is going to have kind of on our talent strategies moving forward. So really, the advice here is to be successful, organizations, in particular, the recruiting teams, need to have a very agile and flexible approach and to be able to pivot on a very personalized basis in order to attract the talent that they're going to need moving forward. So let's move to the next slide. And so let's start with really, what do candidates want? I mean, that's an important question to answer. And in Ceridian, we actually do a yearly report called the Pulse of Talent Report. And our recent report in 2023 surveyed close to 9,000 workers globally. And interestingly, what we found is that 70% of the respondents we surveyed are in fact a flight risk. So they're either looking for a new job at the moment, or they're thinking about a possible change. And so let that stat reflect. Think about the fact that probably 2/3 of your workforce, your current workforce, is possibly a flight risk. And what would you do if even 50% of those folks were to leave you? When we asked the survey respondents what was most important in terms of attributes of a job, compensation did still rank as number one. And I don't think that's any surprise in lieu of what we've talked about in terms of rising inflation rates, economic uncertainty. I mean, that is always going to be probably a number one factor for candidates. But this was really closely followed by the desire and need for flexibility or work-life balance. And that was number 2 on the list. And then what was most fascinating is number 3 on the list was this concept of job security and safety. And if you'd look back on previous surveys in previous years, it would be rare to see security and safety showing up in the top 3 of these lists. Another interesting aspect to point out, based on generational differences, is that we're noticing that the Gen Z or Gen Z respondents are actually rating flexibility even higher than compensation. And so that's kind of the number one factor for them moving forward. It is worth noting this survey was done before these mass layoffs were happening. So I would suspect that we would probably see security even higher up on the list following those layoffs, which is rather interesting. At Ceridian in particular, we're actually seeing candidates place a bigger emphasis on trust. And so we continue to hear story after story from a lot of candidates on the fact that folks have been laid off either via an email or perhaps just being locked out of their computer without warning. And again, this is causing candidates to be very thoughtful about the types of organizations that they're going to join moving forward. They're looking for companies to treat them with respect. And really, the words are meaningless. The companies really need to back up with actual actions and insights. And so there is an expectation, not unlike what's happening in the DEI space, that you can't just tell candidates what you're going to do. You really need to back it up with those actions moving forward. And so while compensation is always going to be an important factor, I certainly think the days of those perks that we used to see, things like offering ping pong tables, on-site dry cleaning, or free lunches and snacks, they're not resonating the same way they used to with candidates. And employees, in fact, have started to figure out that those were all means to get them to work longer hours and stay longer in the office working. So really, it's trust and safety that are the new hot perks that candidates are looking for. And again, the takeaway for you all will be to think about your talent and recruiting strategies, how you workforce plan in a more thoughtful and planful way, to not be reactive and to really think thoughtfully about what's going to work for you moving forward to ensure that you do not overhire and that you don't get into the situation where you're going to have to do unfortunate layoffs. So moving on, when I talk about trust and safety, what are we really talking about? Well, trust is really a two-way street. Employees want trust from their employers, trust that they will be treated with respect, trust that their employers will live up to their mission and values, and trust that their employer will do what they have promised they're going to do. But employees also want to feel trusted by their employer, and that means things like flexibility in how, when, and where they do their jobs. And coming out of the pandemic, many candidates are seeking that psychological safety. And this includes working for an organization that's in a steady state and really does offer them job security. But it does also mean things like offering that work-life balance that a lot of folks are looking for, providing an environment where employees can be honest about the struggles that they're all dealing with, particularly mental health, and really having a manager who cares for them as a person as well as an employee. And this also means being allowed to be vulnerable with your manager and the team that you work with. And this concept of psychological safety continues to rise in importance. And it's something that a lot of employees are looking for so that they truly feel that they can trust their employer. And as I said earlier, words are no longer enough. Candidates are really wanting to see actions that back it up. And so for us here at Ceridian, we've used a couple of strategies to demonstrate to employees and candidates that we are serious about cultivating this culture of trust and safety. One is this flexibility in how, where, and when employees do their work. The second is really investing in our employer brand to ensure that it's authentic and it really lives up to the experience that we provide here at Ceridian. And what we tell candidates throughout the interview process and the journey is actually what they experience when they show up on day one. How are we living that brand purpose each and every day, and all the attributes that make this a great place to work? And then lastly, we're really working diligently to prepare our hiring managers as they will be a critical component to working in this new global hybrid future of work. These line managers are going to become the glue that holds these teams together. They will be the ones to provide the psychological safety that we talk about. And they will also be critical to helping your organizations drive retention and really reduce the turnover that we're tending to see. And also, don't underestimate that when it comes to attracting talent to your organizations, it is the experience that candidates have with your hiring middle managers that will make all the difference in the ability to kind of lock in that talent. We're not far from the days of a situation where we're going to be using AI tools to kind of rank and stack managers on social media so that candidates will know who are the good managers to work for, not unlike what you're seeing right now in the medical profession where people are kind of ranking their doctors. So when we talk about flexibility as a recruiting tool, again, we're talking about it in two aspects. Again, how, when, and where an employee does their work, but also providing employees that career flexibility and internal mobility that they're looking for. So again, after compensation, flexibility is where we get the most questions from candidates, and I would suspect your organizations are experiencing something similar. Many candidates are asking outright, how is the organization providing that flexibility? And it is becoming a key differentiator in order to compete with other companies, particularly as we are seeing other organizations starting to force employees back into the office. I think this flexibility will be a key differentiator and something that will afford you the ability to kind of compete with other organizations. However, like everything, there is a fine balance to it. So you do need to employ a very personalized approach to this flexibility, because we are also starting to get questions, particularly from the younger generation, around what are the hindrances to not being in the office. For instance, are they going to miss out on water cooler talk roaming around the hallways? Are they going to lose out on that visibility with kind of senior leadership? And in particularly, will this impact their ability to be tapped on the shoulder for particular projects or engagements? So again, I think we need to be very thoughtful about a very personalized approach to how we employ flexibility. So let me share a little bit on the next slide in terms of the approach, again, that organizations are taking. And again, I share some examples here at Ceridian in terms of what we are doing around our approach to that flexibility. So first off, we are a remote first company. And having said that, we are looking for ways to constantly provide flexibility to our employees so that they can employ that work-life balance that they're looking for. So here's a couple of examples that we're employing. First off, we implemented a no meeting Friday, particular to internal meetings only. We'd been getting a lot of feedback from our employees around, their days were consumed by endless meetings, and some of them did not always add value. So we did implement this approach to eliminate internal meetings on Fridays to give them time back in their day. And again, to give employees that flexibility and control over their own calendars, ultimately to allow them time to focus on key and critical tasks to getting their work done. And so again, this has been a great value to employees to kind of get that flexibility and control over their own calendars. Next on the list, we're one of those organizations that offers unlimited vacation days and time away from work. And again, this is in direct correlation to supporting the well-being of our employees and really to show and encourage them that we want them to take time off work where they need to not only manage their professional lives, but they're also their personal lives, particularly in this hybrid and remote way of working. So for some of our employees, it's allowed them to maybe take extended holidays that they might not have felt they've been able to do with other organizations they've worked at. But more often than not, it just allows people to take that extra day off whenever they need it. And again, whenever it's to, find time with the kids, attend a school event, or just take some much needed time out of their day, this unlimited time away from work does give people, again, that control and flexibility over their own calendars. And at the same time, it does address this concept of trust because employees feel that the organization trusts them to get their job done and that we're not going to abuse this perk that the organization provides us. Expanding on the concept of well-being, we're one of those companies like many others that also employs wellness days throughout the year. And so while we do have this unlimited time off away from work and people can do that at any time, the benefit of the wellness days that we've heard from employees is the fact that during these wellness days, everyone in the organization is off on the same day. And so at the same time, it kind of limits the amount of emails that employees are going to return to when they come back to the office. So the benefit of everyone being off the same day really limits that work that we're going to return to and really feels that people can disconnect and truly take time away from work. And then lastly, and most interestingly, we've launched a pilot around the compressed work week. And so we did this across a number of key geographies whereby we're promoting this idea of flexibility through employees working kind of a 980 shift, whereby they get every second Friday off by working an extra hour in a 2-week period. And what our pilot was able to demonstrate was that there was no impact on productivity or efficiency to the team. And in fact, employees felt they were more productive and more efficient and felt more recharged having taken this time off. And so how the concept works is that half the team will take one Friday off, the other half will take the second Friday off. And that way we're still able to provide both our internal and external customers with all the support and coverage required to be able to kind of manage our business needs. And I'll just share a personal story around this as well. I have one of my recruiters that I recently hired where this concept of the compressed work week was what actually drew him to the organization. He's a single father, and this compressed work week gave him the time to spend more time with his family. And it was a direct correlating factor as to why he accepted our offer when his daughter found out that he was going to have every second Friday off to spend with her. Beyond these programs, I'll just highlight some of what we're hearing other companies do as well. A lot of other companies are continuing to lean into programs like the work from anywhere concept, where employees are now able to work anywhere in the world where organizations have a legal entity and the ability to kind of pay them. And many organizations have found that valuable. Here at Ceridian, we're toying with the concept of paid and unpaid sabbaticals for employees where they can kind of take time off in bulk status. We're looking potentially at a step down program to kind of ease people into semi-retirement or retirement. And then, of course, there's always those favorable summer hours that a lot of employees engage as well. So you can see these are many examples kind of flexibility that you can provide your employees that also get to this concept of kind of trust across the organization as well. So beyond the flexibility that you can provide through those types of programs that I just talked about, there also continues to be demand from employees around, flexibility in terms of their own careers, and in particular, career mobility and internal mobility. What's fascinating about this is that this does not only benefit the employees, but the organizations that you work for as well. So in this environment of disruption, chaos, and the war for talent, making people want to stay in your organizations is as important, if not more important, than the ability to kind of attract new talent to your organizations. So in effect, using these types of tools helps you re-recruit your own employees, ensuring that you hold on to your hypo talent and your top talent, and that you really retain these key elements within your own company. And again, according to our Pulse of Talent report, more than half of respondents who are looking for new jobs said they would actually consider staying with their current company if those opportunities did exist, in particular, either changing their career path within the company or just simply seeking out a new role. So if we reflect back on my earlier comments that 70% of employees out there are generally looking for a new job, wouldn't it be great if most of those folks you could retain and find them a new role within your own organization versus them leaving to go work for one of your competitors? And again, what's critical here is to ensure that you have clear succession plans in place so that as these people move into new roles, you've got a plan of action to kind of backfill and that you're not caught off guard by any unexpected movements in your business. And then a key element of this flexibility too is to ensure that you're doing stay interviews with these hypos and key talent. So really understanding, are in fact these employees looking to potentially make a move, and really understanding what are their needs being met, and are these folks a potential flight risk for your organization? And here's just some stats to kind of back up some of that commentary. So again, this is from our Pulse of Talent report. Interestingly, we found 49% of respondents were looking to contribute skills that they've gained in their current role to perhaps a new project within their organization or a new role within their organization. And again, it's another interesting aspect that a lot of companies are toying with is how can they even use employees in a certain department to work on projects in another department. And again, employees are looking for that. Secondly, 43% of respondents were looking to, in fact, move into a new role in a different department altogether. And then lastly, 35 or a third of respondents were actually looking to outright do a shift in their career path within the company. And again, I don't think we would have seen stats like that years ago where people were looking to do a radical shift in their career trajectory and doing something completely different within their actual career. Continuing in some stats, again, this is from our survey last year in 2022, where we surveyed over 2,000 executives across a number of organizations. And we found that 74% of companies often or always hire external candidates for leadership roles instead of promoting from within. And imagine the kind of messaging that this could be sending your internal workforce, where they see that most of external leadership positions are being given to external talent outside of the company. Now, it could be for good reason why companies are deciding to do this, but I would argue that you could probably gain just as much fresh perspective by perhaps promoting somebody from a different department into opportunities within your organization. And this is often why many organizations do have a policy or program whereby they do move talent across different departments or different functional areas so that those leaders can become well-rounded. But again, I think it is rather unfortunate that we see that almost in 3/4 of situations, most senior level roles do end up getting filled by external talent rather than looking in-house across your own organizations. So let's move on to some other concepts. The other aspect that I think is important when we talk about trust and stability is really this concept of your employer brand and how that continues to rise in importance in terms of your ability to attract and secure talent. Again, trust is at an all-time low across society. There's lack of trust in our government institutions, healthcare institutions, educational institutions, and we're now seeing that impact companies and organizations. And so your employer brand becomes absolutely critical in terms of how do you engage with talent in order to attract them into the organization. So if we think about what is brand, moving to the next slide, this slide, I think, really articulates the importance of brand and how it can really resonate. Brands are born of experience and reflect reputation. And your reputation amongst candidates is going to be key to you securing talent. And I love this image because I think it just reflects, again, the importance of brand. And when you look at a company like Starbucks, they are experts at this. They're not just a plain cup of coffee, and people are willing to pay a premium for kind of the Starbucks brand. And so they're experts not only in promoting their product and brand, but their employer brand as well. One part of Starbucks employer branding strategy that makes the coffee chain stand out so much is really their social media presence. Starbucks has dedicated Instagram and Twitter accounts where the company regularly shares highlights of its employer brand and has ongoing interaction with prospective candidates. A key focus of their brand is around social media posting and really sharing employee success stories that are authentic and genuine and really resonate in the external marketplace. These stories are highlighted again across their Twitter, Instagram, and Starbucks even developed things like Jobs Playlist on its YouTube channel that particularly targets the Gen Z crowd. And I think they've been a great example of how they really engage in that kind of media content. Today's job seekers, particularly that younger generation, are likely to do a ton of research on you as an employer. And so your social media presence is going to be absolutely critical, because before they apply for roles, they're going to be checking into all of your social media accounts and doing all of that research. So think about your social media strategies. Think about how you can highlight your employees to share those success stories of working in your organization. And your employee testimonials really will be authentic and build that trust amongst the community. Candidates don't want to hear, unfortunately, from your corporate marketing teams and comms teams because there's not necessarily trust around that messaging. Whereas hearing it directly from your employees, that content does resonate and that content is compelling in terms of kind of driving that message and engagement. There are some caveats, though, to watch out for. And again, it is this concept that your brand must be authentic and genuine. And so again, your brand needs to represent your company values, your mission, and your overall experience. And the social media presence that you employ, again, needs to be authentic to build that connection. So again, you need to be thoughtful around creating a holistic social media strategy across all of the owned channels that you employ. Again, something that I had done in a past life when I was at GE is that we built a brand ambassador training program to kind of mobilize our own employees, again, to drive this authenticity of message. We actually didn't have any budget around kind of employer branding. And so what we decided to do is to mobilize our 300,000 employees and use them as brand evangelists. We established this formalized brand ambassador program where we trained our own employees on our brand promise, and we really leveraged their own experiences to articulate what it was like to work at GE in a very authentic and genuine way. And this grassroots approach really did resonate with our candidate base. And it really contributed tremendously in our ability to kind of attract talent, particularly at the younger generation. This becomes even more important, again, with that Gen Z crowd, because again, they are very serious about social responsibility issues. They're asking questions around your ESG reports and how are you leaning into being responsible from a social perspective. They want to know what you're doing from a DEI perspective. They want to know that you're going beyond the lip service and actually offering concrete examples of what it's like to support these important issues. Examples include how companies responded to the George Floyd protests, carbon footprint reduction that's being talked about. These are all things that you need to think about as part of your brand strategy, and that candidates are actually starting to ask questions about as they engage in the interview process. And again, important that not only your HR and recruiting teams know how to respond to these questions, but how do you mobilize your line managers so that they are representing your brand consistently and authentically and really following through on your organization's commitment? And so that leads us to kind of the third instance that we need to talk about, which is really how do you prepare your middle managers? And again, as I mentioned at the top of the call, your middle managers are going to be absolutely critical to the success that your organizations have in terms of equipping them and preparing them for their critical role in this hybrid remote way of working. Your middle managers are the front line of building the culture of trust and safety, engaging with the teams that they lead and manage, and really selling the company in the interviewing process. And again, keep in mind, with our global remote workforce, these managers are key to inspiring the talent they're leading and really communicating to all the disparate teams and global teams that they're often managing. And again, we have been required to do this now in a very virtual way of working and having to kind of leverage the technology at our fingertips to kind of engage and interact with our employee base. Keep in mind, middle managers have also been targeted at times by some of the layoffs that we've been seeing happen across organizations, particularly call out Meta. They actually said that middle managers would have to either transition to individual contributor roles or they would have to leave the company outright. And I think that was a rather unfortunate decision because, again, it's these middle managers that are the front line of the employee experience. Having said that, the middle managers are also dealing with a lot of issues. Many have not actually been trained on how to do their role as a line manager, particularly in this virtual way of working. So you need to think about, have your middle managers been equipped not only on how to manage and lead teams, but to do so in a virtual approach? And are they leveraging the technology in all the right ways, again, to build and foster that trust across their employee base? Keep in mind, they're also dealing with their own burnout. Again, according to our Pulse of Talent reports, 89% of middle managers are dealing with burnout. And they're dealing with their own issues while at the same trying to support the teams that they lead and manage. And so often we can take our middle managers for granted. And certainly we see that from a lot of the senior leadership teams where more and more they're putting work on the plates of the middle managers and not equipping them with the tools they need to be successful. And keep in mind, your managers are also employees. So they're looking for the same support, the tools, and also that same trust that we talked about from the company. And so they're playing both roles, that of an employee, that of a manager, and taking on both of these roles in this environment can be rather daunting. So there's some recommendations you can make to kind of get your managers back on track. So again, first off, realize they are employees too, and to treat them with that same care and attention, and to foster that same trust and stability that they are looking for as a leadership team to really be the most effective managers that they can be. You need to invest in their training, as we talked about, particularly in this new world. So again, are you giving any new managers that you promote that new hire training that's absolutely critical for them to be successful? So if you don't have these new manager training courses, that should be the first thing that you're building into your organization. And as well, are you teaching people how to manage in this virtual and remote way of working? So do they have all the right tools and equipment and technology needed to lead teams globally that sit in different time zones, different geographies, and have different ways of working from a cultural experience? It's also important that you create a support community for this team. So do they have a network of other managers that they can reach out to, share best practices with, and provide opportunities to coach and mentor one another? They'll often be dealing with all of the same issues and challenges, particularly around these concepts of trust and building engagement among the teams. So again, building this community and network amongst managers will help them share best practices with each other. And then specifically when we're talking about the role relating to recruiting, again, are your managers well trained on their role in the recruiting process and the recruiting journey? Do they know what position they play in this critical role to attract and secure talent across the organization? And again, this reflects back to that concept of, are they an effective brand ambassador for your organization? Do they know that their job is to sell the company to candidates and that they need to understand in many cases, talent and candidates are passive and may not always be looking to work directly for your organization. Yes, people are open for work, but they're very passive and they need to be sold on opportunities, again, related to your brand as to why your organization is the one that they should be working for. So your managers need to be equipped with all that brand messaging, the EVP that we talked about, to really make sure that they are effectively selling your organization in a very authentic and genuine way and not overselling it, and making sure that they are able to kind of secure and attract talent to your organization. And then the last way to prepare your managers is, again, around this concept of, could they potentially be the ones to do these stay interviews that we talked about? Making sure that they're checking in with their team to understand what makes them tick. Are they enjoying the work? Are they one of that 70% that are looking for a new opportunity, and really, again, driving that engagement and trust amongst their colleagues and team members. So making sure that your managers understand that part of their role does involve them checking in with talent and conducting these stay interviews moving forward. And again, some stats to share around this in terms of what middle managers are telling us. Again, this is from last year's Pulse of Talent report across Ceridian, but we heard 42% of middle managers are looking for those learning and development opportunities. So they're crying out for that coaching, development, and training for them to be more effective leaders across your organizations. As well, they want to have that autonomy over their teams to be able to kind of lead and drive and manage them in a way that's effective for them. And then lastly, they need that support from leadership. So almost a third of respondents want that strong direction from senior leadership and access to senior leadership so that they understand how to do their roles more effectively and more meaningfully. And so in conclusion, there is really no one size fits all to this approach to kind of winning the war for talent, particularly around recruiting. And in some ways, to be successful in competing with other companies, we really need to learn to be everything to everyone and employ many different strategies on a very personalized approach to really draw the talent that you're going to need to be successful. Compensation alone is not going to help you win that war. But again, I think what we're hearing from a lot of employees is that flexibility does go a long way to attract talent. So you need to ensure that your talent strategy does employ that ability to kind of be flexible and be agile, and that your recruiting teams are able to convey that to the candidates that they're engaging with. But equally, really leveraging your EVP and employment brands to translate that authentic and genuine message back to candidates so that they understand what it's like to live your true purpose and values as an organization. And with this world that is constantly changing, trust and safety are going to be the keys to getting candidates on board and to retaining your talent as well. My last bit of parting advice is just to realize that this has been the most chaotic and competitive talent market that I've ever seen in my 25 years of recruiting. And we don't expect that the chaos is going to end anytime soon. It's going to be constant change, constant disruption, particularly as we see tools like ChatGPT disrupt the talent landscape. So do not take your foot off the pedal in terms of your talent strategy. All signs indicate it's going to be a rocky road ahead. But hopefully this has given you some tips and techniques to kind of manage kind of this unsteady environment that we're all going to be entering into. So with that, I'm kind of happy to kind of open up for kind of any questions, commentary, or any kind of feedback that folks are kind of experiencing out in the market.
Great. Thank you, Steve. That was fantastic. So we've got a few questions here that have come in, and we certainly encourage the audience to enter any questions as we're discussing now. So first up, Steve, in your opinion, where is employee benefits landing? Things like, unlimited vacation trend, mental health and well-being benefits as an attraction tool. Is that important?
I think it's huge. And I think the biggest concern coming out of the pandemic is really the well-being and wellness of employees. I think we're all struggling with what are the mental health issues and downstream impacts of coming out of the pandemic. So I think these wellness benefits are going to be absolutely critical and a key differentiator for employees. The challenge is always these come at a cost. And so how are companies going to be able to kind of resource and fund them? But certainly these are the questions I know certainly we're hearing candidates ask about as we interview and engage here at Ceridian. Wellness benefits are top of mind. Time away from work is a critical aspect. And again, I think this whole concept of flexibility, it is the #1 set of questions that candidates have in terms of considering options of employment with organizations. So I think it's really important that you have thought through this talent landscape, the benefits that you're offering, and again, how are you conveying that back to candidates through your hiring managers?
Great. Next question here. We've got a couple of questions actually about Chat GPT, which I guess is not surprising. It's a hot topic. First up, this one from Shannon. She's interested to hear more about Chat GPT being used in recruitment. What are the pros and cons, and how can we prepare for this to stay competitive? And I've got a follow-up.
It's fascinating. I mean, this is hot off the press. I mean, it's only been in existence a couple of months, but it's top of mind, and certainly I know a number of my peers. We've been chatting about what is going to be the impact, particularly from a recruiting perspective. So I think there's a couple of areas we're going to see focus on this. First off, we know candidates already are using ChatGPT to write cover letters and resumes. And I don't think that's concerning, to be honest, because I think, in many cases, candidates have been using career coaches to do that up till now. Folks get people to help them write resumes and career letters. Using ChatGPT is no different. No concern there. Where I think there is concern is, will we start to see candidates using ChatGPT to do assessments or testing? And so will that technology kind of disrupt the whole assessment and psychometric testing field in terms of using the technology to kind of cheat or game the system? So I think that's one area that we're leaning into, and stay tuned to find out more about what the impact is going to be there. What's really fascinating, though, is I do know for a fact there are a couple of companies out there who are starting to explore ChatGPT from an interviewing perspective. So I do not think it's far off the days where we are going to see an avatar actually interviewing candidates and using ChatGPT to do that assessment and grading of candidates ahead of an actual recruiter or line manager interviewing that talent. And so you'll see the day where candidates interviewed by the avatar ranks and stacks based on GPT technology and how that compares to the market. It will grade a candidate. That candidate in turn will then be pre-qualified and vetted to be sent to the recruiting team to kind of expedite and make the whole process more efficient. And so that's where I think we're headed with this technology. Interestingly, I just did an interview with CNBC earlier this week. It's, I think, coming out today or tomorrow. And they've done a whole expose on this. And so stay tuned for that. I think it's going to be posted in the next day or two.
Really good stuff, Steve. The second part of that you touched on a little bit, but is around this, the notion that, workers can also use ChatGPT to kind of fool the system or fool your applicant tracking system by putting in all the keywords from the job, regardless of whether or not they're qualified, to create a really custom cover letter or a resume. And then even potentially, it's worded differently here, but essentially what they're saying is that, you could, because ChatGPT works in real time, they could answer questions that they don't, actually have qualifications to answer and sounds like they're qualified. So how do you handle that? How do you make sure that people aren't using ChatGPT to kind of overstate their qualifications?
It's a risk. And look, ChatGPT is probably going to help in the first stages of the process of recruiting. I think it will certainly help people maybe get a foot in the door, maybe get them that interview. But let's not forget, at some point, you still need to actually interview with someone, and you need to kind of back up and stand behind your experience and skills and be able to speak to it. So, I don't think ChatGPT is going to be used to kind of make up experience, because again, your LinkedIn profile still has to reflect what you've done, and people are going to call you out on that. I do think, again, ChatGPT will be useful in terms of doing research on companies. So I think candidates can kind of use it again from that perspective to do research. I do fear the day where maybe they're using it real time, again, to maybe answer questions in the moment of a technical nature. So again, I think we're going to have to refine our interviewing capabilities to kind of delve into that a little bit more, maybe do some actual in-person testing, where again, we can assess whether people are using technology in the moment to kind of game the system. But again, at the end of the day, it'll help get a foot in the door, but you still got to walk the talk and back things up and show what you're doing. And it's still early days. So I think we're still kind of grappling with how this is going to kind of play out. But I do foresee the day where, somehow we're probably going to have to start bringing people in person to kind of answer these questions in person without any of the technology. The same way that the educational institutions are having to do the same thing, where they're getting now students to write essays in person rather than filtering it through the GPT system.
Very interesting. It's certainly a disruptive technology for sure. Moving on. So the next question deals with middle managers and burnout. So this person has had to replace their key manager 5 times over the last 2 years as they leave for other internal opportunities in the company. So how do you avoid that burnout?
This is the tough one. And I think it goes back to what we talked about in the presentation, that, you need to understand your managers do play 2 roles. I mean, they're a manager, they're here to lead, inspire, direct the team, achieve the outputs that are required. But at the same time, we need to reflect that our managers are also our employees, and they need that same care, attention. They still need that trust that I talked about. They need to feel supported. And I think it gets back to that concept too of psychological safety, right? I think our managers are really craving that they can feel that safety from their leaders, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to feel genuine, to know that they can make a mistake and that they're not going to be punished for it, that they don't have all the right answers in the moment, and that it's okay to not have those answers and to go seek them, and also to rely on others. And I think this is, probably the biggest challenge facing companies right now is the pressure that is put on middle management and line managers. And I think that is going to be absolutely critical to a lot of organization success. I think the other thing to lean into is the org structure. I think coming out of the pandemic, many companies have had to rethink how work is being done, where it's being done, and do the org structures make sense in terms of this new environment, a virtual way of working. I would recommend taking a look at the amount of work that you're putting on middle managers and maybe thinking through your spans and layers, particularly in this virtual way of working, because I think things have radically shifted. And how perhaps can we lighten the load of middle managers by this concept of team supervisors? So relying on people within the lower levels of the ranks to give them some of these middle manager tasks to lighten the load and the burden of the middle managers, but at the same time build that talent pool so that when this middle manager does move on, you also have someone else that's a natural successor to move into this opportunity. And look, we're never going to avoid the fact that people are going to want to move on. I think, again, our Ceridian stats showed that 3/4 of the workforce are looking for new roles. This, again, puts pressure to build your succession plans. And that succession plan needs to be thought about not only internally who could fill these roles, but ideally, how could you tap into your talent acquisition team to also understand who are the 5 or 6 individuals externally that potentially could fill this role if someone were to leave. And so being thoughtful around a succession plan in-house as well as externally can certainly help in that instance where your middle managers are up and leaving the organization.
Good point. And this is more of a comment than a question, I guess, Steve. But this person was just talking about, you discussed what Meta is doing with their middle managers. And they just said, just a reminder, if we lose the people in those ranks, they're also hurting the talent pipeline for senior leadership, right? Because that's where a lot of the next generation of leaders is coming from, is these middle manager positions. So just a thought there.
100%. And again, the impact on brand. I mean, I do worry, do these organizations think about the fact that, again, these posts go out on LinkedIn and people read this day in and day out, and it's really going to affect branding. And just yesterday, I saw an example of a company here that decided to rescind all of their campus offers. And I don't think people and companies understand the downstream impact of that type of action. It will take years for them to rebuild that branding of that opportunity now with the early talent. So it really is important to think through these big stream decisions that companies are making.
Good point. And I'll jump back to Chat GPT just one more time. We had a comment come in, again, more just a little bit of advice here. They were saying that to handle this situation, they ask situation-specific questions about skills which might be a good filter. For example, where did you learn the skill? Describe a situation where you successfully use the skill, things that Chat GPT can't answer, essentially.
I think the other interesting thing about Chat GPT, why maybe we shouldn't be as scared of it, is I think we also need to know this is, again, another tool that we're probably going to want our own employees to leverage and utilize when they're in the role. So the fact that maybe they're using it in the interview process or to get in the interview could be a good thing in terms of hey, you now know how to use this technology and you're going to employ it when you get hired. So if I look at myself, I'm going to want my recruiters to know how to use ChatGPT so that they can maybe employ it as a tool to assess and screen talent. So, maybe we should not be as scared of it as we think we are right now.
For sure. So this one here, this goes back to, you cited a stat that said 70% of workers are a flight risk. What are the warning signs that we should watch for in these workers to know that they are actually thinking about leaving and not, like an actual real problem that they might leave?
I mean, in my experience, the biggest warning sign is always that employee that all of a sudden becomes quiet. I think that's always been a big warning sign for me of perhaps either disengagement or, the fact that they're, looking for something else. So I think, always be concerned when that employee that was usually contributing and a loud voice in the room and always coming up with ideas, all of a sudden turns quiet and is not as visible. I think that's certainly a huge warning sign. I do find now, I think employees are learning to be more open and transparent. So I think, again, the importance of these stay interviews can be very impactful. And again, I had a scenario myself where I had one of my top talent leave me a couple of months ago, and having that stay interview or that stay connection with that individual kind of gave me those warning signs that this was kind of coming. And is there potentially anything I can kind of do to address the situation? But I do find the minute they kind of go quiet is the biggest kind of warning sign to be looking out for.
No, for sure. That's definitely a good one. This next question is going to talks about social media. So any tips on how a small company, we have 20 staff, can have a recruitment social media presence or build their employer brand? They're asking here, can we compete with the Starbucks or Lululemons of the world realistically? How do they start? How do they leverage social media?
You can. And this is where I go back to just my experience at GE. I mean, you would have thought I was working for this large conglomerate, well-known company, huge team. People would have thought I had this massive brand budget, and we didn't. We had no budget for branding, surprisingly. So again, I would recommend this whole concept of the brand ambassador training. It might be wise to do a bit of a lunch and learn session, pull people into a room, order the pizza and beer, and start thinking about, why do those 20 individuals enjoy working for your organization? What is it that they enjoy about the company? What is the differentiator that makes you guys unique to your competitors? And craft that story. Then equip these individuals to kind of then convey that story back out on social media through kind of LinkedIn posts, Twitter posts, and feeds. It's not hard to kind of come up with a calendar to say, Joe, you post something on Monday, Trisha, you post something on Friday, the following week, someone else can post something. And for that messaging to be authentic and genuine, I think is important. So just have them share their own personal stories of why they enjoy working there or a great project that they worked on. And I think it is those authentic, genuine stories that truly do resonate with candidates and will allow you to compete with the Starbucks and the Lululemons of the world. And that's what employees are looking for. They want to know that the messaging is real, authentic, genuine. And again, what they're hearing about is what they're going to experience when they come into the organization. But I do think it is important to understand what makes your company unique or special. We all have something in our organizations that are unique and special and differentiate us. And sometimes it's just finding that time to get in a room together to uncover it. And don't underestimate the value of that exercise to kind of retain that talent. I think once that talent recognizes all the good stuff about working in the organization and coming together, it's also a retention tool. And again, for the cost of pizza and beer, it's a small price to pay to kind of get this messaging going.
Sure, we've got a couple minutes left here, so maybe we'll squeeze in two more. This one deals with the compressed or the 4-day work week. In your opinion, is that where we're going? Have we reached a tipping point in terms of that being a common work week?
I think yes and no. I mean, I think conceptually it's great. I think a lot of employees are looking for it. And look, we're piloting it now. And again, it's going well, but there's certainly some challenges, and I'll just call some of them out. The biggest challenge often will come from your senior executive team in terms of, what do you mean we're going to let people take a day off of work? And we have goals to achieve and work to do. So, one, you got to think about how do your senior executives going to support this, and are they kind of the bottom to the concept? Two, there's always the concern of how do we meet the needs of our customers when folks are going to be out of work? So what do I do when customer calls at 2 p.m. on a Friday and nobody's there to take the call? So you have to think about work coverage and making sure that you're delivering on the needs of your external and internal customers. And then interestingly, there's a ton of administrative deal aspects to work through. So we had challenges around some of our employees who were on hourly pay and kind of the impact of overtime and how that was going to reflect on our ability to kind of offer the compressed work week. So there's a huge administrative component to kind of work through. Not dissimilar to this concept of working anywhere in the world. We hear all these great stories of companies that are letting employees work from Tahiti and Bali. I don't think people understand that technically you can only do that for a short period of time before you violate tax rules and payroll issues. So you just can't work from anywhere, employees. Like there are all these issues that employers need to work through, so it's not that easy. So yes, I think the world is being pushed in that direction, but it's not as easy as everyone thinks. And I think the fact that we're seeing a lot of companies starting to force employees back into work permanently 5 days a week leads us to believe that the hybrid way of working may not necessarily be here to stick as well. So again, I think the takeaway from my presentation too is we're in this constant chaos, changing world where we constantly have to be flexible and adaptable. And things are just going to constantly be in change and in flux.
Great. All right. And our last question deals with pay transparency. Any thoughts on posting salary information in a job? And the comment here as well, looks like many jurisdictions are going to soon mandate it anyway. Is that a good practice to put the salary in?
Yes. Well, first off, if any of you are operating in, certain states and provinces in Canada and the US, it is a requirement. So you're out of compliance now if you're not doing it. So you better start doing it because it actually is a compliant requirement. At the same time, I do think it is what candidates are asking for, and I think it's good business protocol to start giving visibility to ranges and wages. Certainly from a DEI perspective, I think it's going to be important to make sure that we're paying people fairly for the same work and that there's no discrepancies from that aspects. I think it will set expectations with candidates in terms of what they're looking for in terms of work. And so it should help the recruiting process by eliminating people who are either outside that range or looking for a different salary. The big question is, what ranges do you post? That is going to give visibility to your own employee base. And I know there are some companies out there who do not publish their ranges internally. So that's going to be a problem they're going to have to deal with. And the situation that's come up on social media a lot recently has been the fact that as employees are seeing the ranges for their companies and realizing that they're low in the range, the uncomfortable, awkward conversations that have to happen with that employee as to why they sit low in the range. And the fact that in some instances, those employees are starting to apply for their same job, knowing that they're low in the range and they want to bump in pay or applying for other roles. So it's a very challenging situation. Again, it's going to come back to this concept of trust in terms of how do you build that trust with your employees to understand where they're positioned in the salary range, that they're fairly compensated, why they are positioned where they are, and the fact that not everyone can be making the top of the range. And I think this is the struggle we're all going to have when we post the range that says this pays between 80 and 120K. Why am I not making $120,000? And so I think we need to educate our employees that these are general ranges, that there are a number of jobs that fall within these ranges and not every job matches this range outright. But it is a good practice. It is a compliance issue, particularly in the US and Canada. We also know this is being talked about in the UK, Australia, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is going to become a global issue in the next 6 to 12 months, where many countries are mandating this wage transparency.
And great insight, Steve. And that's going to have to conclude our session today. So on behalf of Talent Canada, thank you everyone for joining us today for our very first HR Bootcamp. We want to extend our gratitude to you, Steve, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. And again, as a reminder, this is just part one of a 10-part series. We encourage you to tune in for the rest of them. Our next session is taking place in April. It looks at training and development. So stay tuned for more information on that at talentcanada.ca. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. Keep an eye on our website for upcoming webinars and other HR related content. We thank you for your participation and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.